My daughter-in-law told people I embarrassed her because I was poor. At family gatherings, she would whisper loud enough for others to hear, "She doesn't belong with us." I stayed silent, even as the humiliation burned inside me. But weeks later, at a grand gala filled with important people, the guest of honor announced his new partner, and it was me. Her face turned white as the entire room stood and applauded. Before I share what happened, make sure to subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. My name is Clara Jennings. I am 68 years old, a widow, and I live a simple life in a small apartment. I spend my mornings caring for my plants and my afternoons volunteering at the local library. I don't have much money, but I have peace, memories of my late husband, and the joy of watching my grandson grow. My son Daniel is busy with his career, and I don't see him as much as I'd like. His wife, Victoria, comes from a wealthy family. She loves fancy clothes, big houses, and showing off her lifestyle. To her, people are measured by what they wear and what they own. To me, people are measured by kindness and honesty. Victoria never hid how she felt about me. At dinners, she would criticize my clothes, my old handbag, even the way I spoke. Once, when I wore a dress I had kept for years, she muttered to a friend, "She looks like she came from a thrift store." Daniel heard but stayed quiet, pretending not to notice. The worst part was how small I felt every time she did it. I would smile politely and excuse myself, even though inside I wanted to cry. My grandson Oliver, only 10 years old, would often come sit next to me and whisper, "Don't listen to Mom, Grandma. You're perfect." His words kept me strong when nothing else could. I thought I could handle Victoria's cruelty by ignoring it, but I was wrong. It wasn't just whispers or comments anymore. It became a pattern, one that tore at my dignity until I couldn't stay silent any longer. The tension with Victoria only grew worse as the weeks went on. It wasn't just the occasional whisper or sly remark anymore. It became open, almost proud humiliation. She wanted everyone to know that in her eyes, I was beneath her. At Daniel's company barbecue, I wore a neat blouse and a skirt I had sewn myself years ago. I stood quietly near the food table, greeting people politely, when I heard her loud voice from across the lawn. "She never fits in at these things. Look at her clothes, so plain. She makes us look like we can't afford better." People glanced in my direction, some with pity, some with discomfort. My face burned, but I forced myself to keep smiling, as if her words hadn't stabbed me. Later that evening, Daniel tried to smooth things over. "Mom, don't take it personally. You know how Victoria is." I looked at him, hurt flashing in my chest. "She's your wife, Daniel, but I'm your mother. How can you stand by while she talks about me like that?" He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "I don't want to start fights. Let's just keep the peace. That was his excuse. For me, it wasn't peace. It was silence, forced down my throat like a bitter pill. The worst moment came at a charity brunch Victoria insisted I attend. It was a formal affair, full of wealthy people in elegant clothes. I wore my best dress, a navy blue one with pearl buttons, and a string of pearls my husband had given me on our 25th anniversary. I felt proud walking in, thinking maybe if I carried myself with grace, she would finally accept me. But halfway through the event, I overheard her speaking to a group of women. She didn't even lower her voice. "That's my husband's mother, over there. She embarrasses me. She's poor. She doesn't belong in our circles." The words hit me like a slap. My hands trembled as I clutched my teacup. I wanted to shout, to tell her I belonged more than she ever could, because I had lived a life built on love, not money. But instead, I sat frozen, staring into my tea, while the laughter of her friends echoed in my ears. When I got home that evening, I closed my door and finally let the tears fall. I wasn't crying because of her wealth or my lack of it. I cried because my dignity had been stripped from me in front of strangers, and my own son hadn't defended me. I felt invisible, unwanted, like an unwelcome shadow in my own family. The only person who seemed to see me was Oliver. A few days later, he came to my apartment for cookies after school. He noticed my puffy eyes and asked, "Did Mom say something mean again?" I tried to brush it off, but he pressed my hand in his little fingers. "Grandma, you don't need to care what she says. You're the best person I know. You always make me feel safe. That's more important than clothes or money." His words warmed my heart, but they couldn't erase the sting of humiliation. For years, I had lived simply, never ashamed of what I had or didn't have. But Victoria's constant reminders made me start questioning myself. Was I dragging my family down? Did I really not belong? One evening, I sat by the window, staring at the city lights. I thought of my late husband, Henry, and how he used to tell me, "Clara, your worth isn't in what you wear or what you own. It's in who you are." I whispered into the night, "Henry, I wish you were here. I need your strength." It was in that quiet moment of despair that something shifted inside me. I realized I couldn't keep allowing Victoria's cruelty to define me. Her words were sharp, but they weren't the truth. I still had dignity. I still had worth. And one day I would find a way to show her that money and pride couldn't erase a person's value. I didn't know how or when it would happen, but I promised myself I would no longer let her humiliation bury me in silence. The weeks after that charity brunch were some of the hardest I had endured. I kept replaying Victoria's words in my mind. "She doesn't belong with us." I had heard insults before, but something about the way she said it, so boldly in front of her friends, stripped away every ounce of confidence I had left. I found myself declining family invitations, claiming I was tired or unwell, when really I couldn't bear the thought of being humiliated again. Yet even in my lowest moments, Oliver never let me slip into silence for long. He visited me often, bounding into my small apartment after school, with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. "Grandma, let's make cookies," he would cheer, as if nothing in the world could be wrong. His laughter was medicine, but his little questions pierced my heart. "Why doesn't Mom like you at parties?" "I think you're the nicest person there." I didn't know how to answer him without breaking his heart. All I could say was, "Sometimes people forget what really matters, sweetheart. They get lost chasing things that don't last." One afternoon, as I was shelving books at the library where I volunteered, a tall gentleman with silver hair approached me. His presence was calm but commanding, the kind of man people noticed the moment he entered a room. "Mrs. Jennings?" he asked politely. "Yes." I turned, slightly startled. "My name is Richard Caldwell," he said, with a kind smile. "I knew your husband, Henry, years ago. We worked together on a community project. He always spoke fondly of you." Memories of Henry flooded me, and I smiled softly. Henry loved helping others. It was his way of giving back. Richard nodded. "I admired that about him. And I see you've carried on that spirit, working here and volunteering your time. That's rare these days." We spoke for a while, and to my surprise, he listened with genuine interest. Not once did he glance at my simple clothes or make me feel small. Before leaving, he said, "I'd like to invite you to a gala I'm hosting. It's a fundraiser for one of my charities. I think you'd enjoy it. And to be honest, I'd be proud to have you as my guest." At first, I laughed nervously. "Me? At a gala? I'm not exactly the kind of woman who belongs in ballrooms." Richard shook his head firmly. "Mrs. Jennings, worth isn't measured by gowns or jewels. It's measured by character. You belong more than most people who will be there." His words struck something deep inside me. For weeks, I had been drowning in shame because of Victoria's cruelty. But here was a man of stature and influence, telling me that I was enough just as I was. That evening, when Oliver came over, I told him about the invitation. His eyes lit up. "Grandma, you have to go. You'll look amazing. You're already amazing. Everyone will see it." His faith in me was the push I needed. Still, doubt lingered. I didn't own a gown suitable for such an event. But when I mentioned it to my neighbor, Mrs. Hall, she smiled and opened her closet. "I have just the dress," she said, pulling out a simple but elegant navy gown with delicate lace sleeves. "It's been waiting for the right person to wear it again." I tried it on, and for the first time in years, I looked at myself in the mirror and felt proud. Not flashy, not wealthy, but dignified. I paired it with the string of pearls Henry had given me on our 25th anniversary. They weren't expensive, but they carried more value than any diamond necklace ever could. The night before the gala, I laid the dress across my bed and stared at it. My heart pounded with nerves, but also with something new. Anticipation. This wasn't about revenge on Victoria. It wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about reclaiming myself, about stepping out of the shadows she had tried to shove me into, and reminding myself that I had worth, no matter what anyone said. I whispered to Henry's photo on my nightstand, "I'm going to stand tall tomorrow. Not just for me, but for us. For the life we built together." For the first time in a long while, I slept peacefully. The turning point had come. I wasn't just a widow living in silence anymore. I was Clara Jennings, and I was ready to walk into that ballroom with my head high. Not as someone ashamed, but as someone who belonged. The night of the gala arrived, and my nerves felt like a storm inside me. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the navy gown Mrs. Hall had lent me. The pearls Henry once gave me rested against my collarbone, glowing softly in the lamplight. For years I had been made to feel small, but when I looked at myself that evening, I saw dignity. I whispered, "This is for you, Henry." For us, Richard arrived promptly, dressed in a tailored suit that gave him an air of quiet power. He smiled warmly when he saw me. "Clara, you look radiant. Are you ready?" I nodded, though my hands trembled as I picked up my small clutch. Stepping into his car felt like stepping into another world. As the city lights passed by, I wondered if I truly belonged in the grandeur that awaited me. But Richard's steady presence calmed me. "Just be yourself," he said. "That's all you need." When we pulled up to the hotel, I nearly gasped. The entrance sparkled with chandeliers, red carpets, and photographers snapping pictures. Guests in glittering gowns and tuxedos streamed through the doors. For a moment I hesitated, but Richard offered his arm. I placed my hand on it and walked forward. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with gold and crystal. Tables were dressed in white linens, and the air buzzed with conversation and laughter. I could feel eyes turning toward us as we entered. Some faces lit with recognition at Richard. Others glanced at me curiously, trying to place who I was. I kept my chin lifted, refusing to shrink. Then, across the room, I saw them, Daniel and Victoria. Daniel's eyes widened in surprise, but Victoria's mouth dropped open slightly before she quickly masked it with a forced smile. She was dressed in a gown dripping with sequins, her hair styled perfectly, but for the first time, she looked unsettled. She leaned toward one of her friends, whispering urgently. I could almost hear the words forming. "What is she doing here?" I felt a rush of calm wash over me. The woman who told me I didn't belong was now the one questioning her own place. The evening carried on with music and polite conversation. Richard introduced me to several guests, speaking highly of my library volunteer work and community involvement. People listened attentively, nodding with respect. No one looked at me as poor or embarrassing. They looked at me as someone who mattered. Finally, the moment came. Richard stepped onto the stage as the lights dimmed slightly. He held the microphone with ease and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to support a cause dear to my heart. But before we continue, I want to share something personal. Over the years, I've met many people, but one person has shown me the kind of grace and kindness that inspires me every day." He paused, his eyes finding mine across the room. My heart raced. "I am honored to introduce to you all," he continued, his voice steady and strong, "my partner in life, Mrs. Clara Jennings." The room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, clapping, smiling, turning their eyes toward me. For a second I felt frozen, overwhelmed by the wave of recognition. Then I stood, my hands trembling slightly as I walked to the stage. The applause grew louder, echoing through the ballroom. As I stepped up beside Richard, he took my hand, raising it proudly. "This woman," he said, "represents what true worth means. Not in wealth or possessions, but in character and heart." The lights reflected off the pearls around my neck, and I felt tears sting my eyes. I looked out into the crowd and saw faces glowing with admiration. And then I saw her, Victoria. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide with shock. She clutched her wineglass so tightly, I thought it might shatter. Her perfect smile had vanished, replaced with disbelief. For once, she had no cutting remark, no whisper of cruelty. In that moment, she was the one who didn't belong. Daniel's expression was a mix of surprise and guilt, his eyes darting between me and his wife. But it was Oliver who made my heart swell. He stood on his chair, clapping with all his might, his smile beaming like sunshine. I held my head high, not for revenge, but for myself. For every moment I had been made to feel invisible. For every time I had swallowed humiliation to keep peace. The applause wasn't just for me. It was for the truth that had finally been seen. When I stepped down from the stage, people came to congratulate me. Victoria stayed rooted in her seat, her face ashen. As I walked past her, I met her eyes. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The silence between us was louder than any insult she had ever thrown at me. That night, I returned home with the pearls still around my neck, my heart lighter than it had been in years. I had stood tall in the very world where she claimed I didn't belong, and the world had applauded. When I woke up the morning after the gala, I still felt the warmth of the applause echoing in my ears. For so long I had carried myself quietly, trying not to cause trouble, swallowing every insult that came my way. But last night, standing beside Richard as he introduced me to the entire room, I had felt something I hadn't in years, seen, respected, valued. It wasn't about wealth or prestige, it was about dignity. I slipped out of bed and went to the mirror. The pearls were still on my nightstand, and I ran my fingers over them gently. They weren't expensive compared to the diamonds and jewels I had seen sparkling on the women at the gala, but they carried the weight of Henry's love and the life we built together. Those pearls had been enough for me then, and they were enough for me now. Yet last night had shown me that sometimes the world needs reminding that true worth doesn't shine from stones, but from the soul that wears them. Later that day, Daniel came to see me. He stood awkwardly in my living room, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Mom," he began, "I owe you an apology. I should have defended you long before last night. I let Victoria's words go unchecked, and that was wrong. Seeing you on that stage, it opened my eyes. I studied his face. He looked tired, older than his years, as if the weight of his choices had finally caught up with him. Daniel," I said softly, "I never wanted you to choose between us. I just wanted respect. Silence can hurt as much as cruel words." He nodded slowly, shame flickering in his eyes. "I know, and I'll do better." Victoria, however, stayed silent. For weeks after the gala, she avoided me, her pride too wounded to confront what had happened. When we finally crossed paths at another family dinner, she could barely meet my eyes. Gone was her smugness, her whispered remarks. Instead, there was a stiffness to her, as though every word she might say could betray her shame. I didn't press her for an apology. I didn't need one anymore. The truth had already spoken louder than anything she could admit. Oliver, on the other hand, couldn't stop talking about it. "Grandma, everyone clapped so loud for you. Did you see Mom's face? She looked like she saw a ghost." He laughed with the innocence only a child could carry, his pride in me glowing brighter than any chandelier from that ballroom. I pulled him into my arms and whispered, "Oliver, always remember, kindness and honesty matter more than money or appearances. Never let anyone make you feel small for being yourself." He nodded, as if he was storing the words away for the future. Life after. That night didn't suddenly turn into a fairy tale. I still lived in my modest apartment. I still walked to the library for my volunteer shifts. I still cooked simple meals and tended to my plants. But something had shifted inside me. I no longer felt the weight of shame dragging me down at family gatherings. I no longer second-guessed my worth when I walked into a room. The humiliation Victoria had thrown at me had lost its sting, replaced by a confidence that no insult could take away. Richard and I grew closer in the weeks that followed. His presence was steady and kind. and he never once treated me as anything less than his equal. When we walked together, people noticed us, but not because of wealth or status, because of the ease and warmth between us. For the first time since Henry passed, I felt companionship blooming in my life again. Not a replacement, but a reminder that love can exist in many forms and at any age. One evening, as I sat on my porch with Oliver playing in the yard, I reflected on everything: the pain of being mocked, the silence of my son, the courage it took to accept Richard's invitation, and the moment of vindication at the gala. It all formed a story I would carry for the rest of my life. A story not about revenge, but about rising above cruelty with grace. The lesson was clear to me. Wealth can buy clothes, jewels, and fleeting attention, but it cannot buy respect. Respect is earned by how you live, how you treat others, and how you carry yourself when no one is applauding. Victoria's obsession with appearances had left her red-faced and ashamed, while my quiet endurance had brought me to a moment where an entire room rose to honor me. I realized that sometimes life has a way of balancing the scales. Not always quickly, not always in the way we expect, but in ways that remind us that truth has a power of its own. I no longer needed Victoria's acceptance. I no longer needed Daniel's defense. I had found my voice, and once found, it could never be silenced again. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the porch, I whispered to myself, I do belong. I always did. If my story touched your heart, please subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I'd love to hear what true worth means to you.